Hello and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. And this week, once again, as always, I'm joined by Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report, co-hosting for the 8th week in a row. Chris, thank you for joining me for another week of postseason baseball.
Thanks for having me back again. It's getting comfortable in here.
Well, we love having you here, so let's keep it going. It's been a fun week of baseball. The Tigers played 5 games in the postseason this past week. 3 games against the Cleveland Guardians in the best of 3 American League wildcard at Progressive Field in Cleveland, and 2 games against the Seattle Mariners in the best of 5 ALDS at T-Mobile Park in Seattle. A 2-1 record against the Guardians to win the AL wildcard. The Tigers finally slay the Guardians, getting payback in 2025 for the Guardians knocking the Tigers out of the playoffs back in 2024. And then a 1-1 record against the Mariners in the ALDS with Game 3 set for Tuesday at Comerica Park in Detroit. The first home playoff game for the Tigers in 2025. That's 4 p.m. Tuesday at Comerica Park with right-hander Jack Flaherty starting for the Tigers and right-hander Logan Gilbert starting for the Mariners. In the AL wildcard, the Tigers won 2-1 on Tuesday, lost 6-1 on Wednesday, and won 6-3 on Thursday. In the ALDS, the Tigers won 3-2 on Saturday and lost 3-2 on Sunday. As this series shifts to Comerica Park in Detroit, how do we feel about the Tigers at 1 win and 1 loss in the ALDS, needing 2 wins in the next 3 games to advance to the ALCS? Are we happy with the split in the first 2 games, or disappointed because there was an opportunity to take a 2-0 series lead where you only needed then 1 more win? Now you need 2 wins. We saw in Game 2, Mariners superstars Cal Raleigh, Julio Rodriguez, they ripped those hopes away from the Tigers with the back-to-back doubles off Kyle Finnegan for the go-ahead run in the 8th inning. That ultimately ended up being the difference maker in the Tigers 3-2 loss in Game 2. So how do we feel? Are we content with the 1-1 record in the ALDS, or do we feel like the Tigers let a chance at a 2-0 record slip away?
Yeah, this is one of those things where if you say, if you told me beforehand, I'd be great with splitting the series out west. But it does feel like a missed opportunity when you go out there and you win that first game, which was the Tigers were at an obvious disadvantage there. They're starting a rookie, Troy Melton. They had to do a Johnny Holstaff game, and they managed to pull it out, which was huge. And then you've got Tarek Skubal on the bump the next day. And Skubal was great. He gave up, 2 home runs. That was, you hope he doesn't do that, but generally speaking, you should hope to score more than 2 runs. You can look at it like the winning percentage across baseball with scoring 2 runs is like 28%. It's like equates to like a 40-win season. So you're not gonna win if you only score 2 runs. So that was tough. And it feels like a missed opportunity, but you are coming home tied with a chance to close it out at home. Now, interesting thing about that is do they want to be home? They haven't won a home game in literally a month. It was September 6th the last time they won. It was like a Saturday against the White Sox. And they lost the next game. That was, people might remember that as the White Sox left fielder stole a home run from Spencer Torkelson. That was kind of the most memorable part of that game. And then they got swept by Cleveland, swept by Atlanta. That's the last time they've won. So, I don't know. Maybe they want to be home. Maybe they don't. But yeah, it feels like a missed opportunity. But I guess, ultimately you turned it into a 3-game series and now you just got to win 2.
Well, I can tell you, I definitely want to be home after spending 2 weeks on the road. I mean, the Tigers haven't played a game at Comerica Park since September 21st. And you're right. It's been a really long time since they've won, but they've been on the road for quite some time. And I do think that this road trip experience for them, I mean, again, it was Cleveland, then Boston to finish the regular season, then back to Cleveland to start the playoffs. And then you go out west to Seattle to start the ALDS. It was a lot of time on the road. I mean, 2 weeks is a long time. I mean, I had to do laundry out on the road. Tarek Skubal had to do laundry out on the road. Like that was a thing that we all went through out there during our 2 weeks of travel. And I think it brought those guys closer together going through what they went through. And I hope that continues to reinvigorate them as they move forward. I mean, we saw a spark at times here or there in these last stretch of games. I think especially in Game 3 of the AL wildcard series, especially in that 4-run inning that they had, we saw a little bit of a spark there. But I think behind the scenes, this team has been pretty calm, cool, collected through everything, especially once they got over that hump and were able to clinch in Boston. But all this travel, it has created some bonding, but it seems like the guys are excited to get back home. But you're right. Like, will they win at home? I mean, who knows? I hope so, but only time will tell. I want to go back to the AL wildcard series, that historic Tarek Skubal start. It was Tuesday. It was a 2-1 win over the Guardians. 14 strikeouts for Tarek Skubal. That was just ridiculous. But then Zach McKinstry had the bunt. Let's not forget about that either. And yeah, Skubal, 14 strikeouts. It tied the Tigers' postseason record set by Joel Coleman in Game 3 of the 1972 ALCS. He also became the 14th MLB pitcher to achieve 14 strikeouts in a postseason start, the first to do so since Garrett Cole in the 2019 ALDS. He really put the Tigers on his back, but it was that Zach McKinstry bunt that drove in the go-ahead run in the 7th inning. And for those who don't know, AJ Hinch does not like to bunt. He does not do it. And in this case, he went away from his normal managerial strategy. Like during the regular season, the Tigers relied on a sacrifice bunt just 5 times. That ranks 29th among the 30 MLB teams, and they never did it with a runner on third during a regular season. But that's exactly what happened in Game 1 of the wild card, and it's why the Tigers won 2-1. We've seen other teams, like they call it guards ball. Cleveland Guardians, they called it guards ball, where they were able to put pressure on you like crazy. They're bunting, sacrifice flies, ball and play. That's just what they do. Stealing bases, aggressive base running. I don't know. Do the Tigers need a little bit of guards ball right now when it comes to where their offense is at? And was it nice to see AJ Hinch pivot to that in Game 1 of the AL wild card, which ultimately was the reason why they won 2-1? I mean, that Zach McKinstry bunt, that's what made the difference.
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't disagree with them kind of avoiding that for most of the season, other than maybe it would be nice to have a couple more guys who can successfully lay out a bunt. It seems like it's something only a couple guys on the team can do. But generally speaking, you want to play for more than one run. But in the playoffs, you want to get the lead no matter what and do what you have to. And yeah, I mean, Hinch went away from a lot of the stuff he did all year long. Part of that was Stephen Vogt's doing. I think that Stephen Vogt's a pretty good manager, and it wouldn't shock me if down the road, but maybe a managerial opening opens up somewhere in New York or somewhere like that, and they come calling for him. But in any event, Hinch for most of the year would do his pockets of lefties. It'd be a right-handed batter and then 2 lefties and a right-handed batter and 2 lefties. Vogt had so many lefties in the bullpen that Hinch had to kind of pivot from that and basically went old school, right, left, right, left, right, left. But so there was like a little bit of a stalemate there. And then you saw Hinch, call for a bunt, which we haven't seen all year long. But sometimes if you're trapped at a 1960s baseball game, sometimes you have to play 1960s baseball. This was like Bob Gibson and Mickey Lolich out there just trading strikeouts. So got to do what you got to do to scratch across a run. And I will say special shout out to Will Vest in that game. Skubal was spectacular, iconic performance, generational. But Will Vest, through no fault of his own, had to get out of a huge jam. And he did it with good pitching and some strong defense, which came back into play a little bit later in the series too. But really impressive there.
And then obviously in Game 3 of that AL wild card, the offense finally breaks through. It's a 6-3 win. The Tigers advance. They celebrate in the clubhouse. That was awesome. That was the first time the Tigers scored more than 5 runs in a game since September 10th. And it was a winner-go-home game. Tigers took that 2-1 lead on Dylan Dingler's solo home run in the 6th inning. But then the Tigers scored 4 runs in the 7th inning, and those runs were courtesy of 3 hits in a row with runners in scoring position, something the Tigers have struggled to do for the past month. Wencio Perez had a 2-run single for a 4-1 lead. Spencer Torkelson had an RBI single for a 5-1 lead. Riley Green had an RBI single for a 6-1 lead. 3 singles in a row, all with runners in scoring position. Oftentimes, all you need to do is pass the baton. You don't always need to swing for the fences. I think the Tigers did a good job in that inning of doing that, but it's been 1 inning since September 10th where they've done that. Like 1 inning since September 10th. So unless something changes, like that is going to be a problem as the Tigers try to make a deep run in the postseason. And then everything shifts to the ALDS where you have Kerry Carpenter, Zach McKinstry, and the bullpen leading the Tigers to the 3-2 win over the Mariners in Game 1 of the ALDS. A lot happened in that Game 1. Troy Melton gave up 1 run in the 4th inning. Rafael Montero gave up 1 run in the 6th inning. But other than that, Tigers bullpen was lights out. I mean, you got scoreless performances from Brant Herter, Tyler Holton, Tommy Kahnle, Kyle Finnegan, Will Vest, Kiter Montero getting the save in that one. The Tigers need a lot more of that moving forward where they can just hand the ball to the next guy and get a scoreless outing. Like they need that over and over again, especially if the offense is not going to produce. That bullpen has to be nails. And then the Tigers took the 3-2 lead in the top of the 11th inning. Spencer Torkelson walked, advanced to second on a wild pitch, and then with 2 outs, Zach McKinstry, Z-Mac drives it in with an RBI single up the middle. But I thought the moment of the game occurred in the 5th inning of Game 1 when Mariners manager Dan Wilson let George Kirby pitch to Kerry Carpenter for a 3rd time. Even though left-handed reliever Gabe Spire was ready to come out of the bullpen. I thought that was a terrible decision by Dan Wilson. Not only does Kerry Carpenter crush right-handed pitchers, but Kerry owns George Kirby. 5 hits, 5 home runs in their all-time matchups. And not only does Carey own Kirby, but Kirby is significantly worse during the third time through the order. Like, he gets worse first time, second time, and then it really gets bad that third time through. So all signs were pointing to sticking with George Kirby being a bad decision by the Mariners. And Kerry Carpenter made the Mariners pay with a 2-run home run, putting the Tigers ahead 2-1 in the 5th inning. And then you shift to game 2, and it's funny how things unfold. Yes, Tarek Skubal gave up the 2 solo home runs to Jorge Polanco. Yes, the Tigers lost 3-2 on Sunday to the Mariners in game 2, the ALDS. 2 runs over 7 innings for Skubal. Solo home runs by Polanco in the 4th and 6th innings. But I want to go to the 5th inning. Kerry Carpenter at the plate for the 3rd time against Luis Castillo with runners on the corners and 2 outs. So pretty much the same situation. In game 1, you have Kerry Carpenter at the plate, runner on second, 2 outs in the 5th inning. In game 2, you have Kerry Carpenter at the plate, runners on the corners, 2 outs in the 5th inning. This time, Mariners manager Dan Wilson did not make the same mistake. This time, the Mariners turned to left-handed reliever Gabe Speier, replacing Luis Castillo, and that put A.J. Hinch in a really tough spot. It was exactly what should have happened in game 1, but in game 1, the Mariners made it easy on A.J. by leaving George Kirby in the game. But in game 2, A.J. Hinch had to decide whether to stick with Kerry Carpenter in a bad matchup against a nasty left-handed reliever or pinch hit Jahmai Jones for Kerry Carpenter to get the matchup advantage, but then you lose Kerry Carpenter for the rest of the game. Of course, we saw A.J. sticks with Carpenter. He strikes out. Runners are stranded on the corners. Jahmai Jones, by the way, he never plays in game 2. And the Tigers never really had another scoring opportunity like they did in the 5th inning. Yes, they scored 2 runs in the 8th inning, but it wouldn't have happened if not for a fielding error. So I thought those were really the 2 big moments of the game, the 5th inning in game 1, the 5th inning in game 2. What are your thoughts on those Kerry Carpenter decisions, both for manager Dan Wilson of the Mariners and manager A.J. Hinch of the Tigers? Because it's just interesting that both of those Kerry Carpenter decisions happened in the 5th inning of games 1 and 2. And obviously they unfolded in completely different ways because of how Dan Wilson went about it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't have been the only person who kind of felt shades of the famous Kirk Gibson 1984 Game 5 of the World Series. So there's a great clip that people show every now and then about, Goose Gossage did not want to walk Kirk Gibson. He thought he could strike him out, and Gibson hit the home run. It was like, well, that was a bad decision. And it felt a little bit like that. Like, oh man, the one guy who owns this starting pitcher, you let him beat you. And that was huge. It was absolutely huge, right? The Tigers hadn't scored yet, and that turned the game completely around. And then, on Sunday, I actually did not have an issue there with Hinch's decision-making because Speier, former Tigers legend, by the way, Speier once upon a time was in the Tigers minor leagues. I think they traded him for Cameron Maben way back in the day. But anyway, he's their best lefty reliever by a significant margin. He was one of the better lefty relievers in baseball this year. And so it's almost like you're hoping Carpenter can do something there. It's a big moment in the game, but you're willing to kind of sacrifice that out for the hope that you get Carpenter up in a big spot again later against, they may bring in Caleb Ferguson or something like that. But odds are you're going to get a more advantageous spot later. It didn't work out. I didn't have a big problem with it. The one sort of mildly interesting decision I found in the game 2 was, Skubal was excellent again, other than the 2 mistakes. It was Hinch going to Kyle Finnegan. In fact, Finnegan's been awesome down the stretch. That there's, he's been a great pickup, but he saw Cal Raleigh and Julio Rodriguez the night before, and Will Vest did not. And so that was kind of a mild surprise to me. I think, going back to the Tigers' big inning in game 3 at Cleveland, I think a lot of that was having them seen Hunter Gaddis 3 straight games. These are professional hitters are very good. And if they see a pitcher multiple days in a row, they can get to him. And that's kind of what happened to Finnegan last night, I think. So it was mildly surprising to me that Hinch went that route. But, with these close games, you can kind of nitpick everything. And that one just didn't work out. I
want to pick your brain on something with Kyle Finnegan. It's interesting that you mentioned that. And I'm curious because when the Tigers acquired him from the Nationals at the trade deadline, they changed his pitch usage significantly. He was a primary 4-seam fastball guy, and then the splitter was more of his secondary pitch. And now he's throwing way more splitters than he is fastballs. And if you look at what he did in the bottom of the 8th inning, I mean, it was 1 fastball to Randy Arozarena. Randy Arozarena strikes out. It was 1 splitter to Cal Raleigh, hits it for a double. And then it was 2 splitters to Julio Rodriguez. He hits the second one for a double. So you're looking at, in that sequence of pitches, it's 8 pitches, 7 of them are splitters. Is that a little bit of a concern with? Obviously, pitch execution matters, but it's the same thing with Tommy Kahnle, right? When Tommy Kahnle is throwing 80% to 90% changeups, if your execution is not perfect, you have no margin for error. And it's kind of becoming the same thing with Kyle Finnegan, I feel, where if you are going to throw 70 to 80% splitters, like you better be able to locate all those perfectly, because I think teams can kind of just start to eliminate fastball, sit splitter. And if you make a mistake and you leave it up, well, then they're going to punish it. And that's pretty much exactly what Cal Raleigh and Julio Rodriguez did. I mean, both of those pitches from Finnegan, they were down in the zone, but they were not painted right on the bottom rail. I mean, they were below the middle and above the bottom, so somewhere right in between there, but they were hittable pitches. But if you're sitting splitter, like, you're going to be able to get to them. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but could that be something that comes back to bite Kyle Finnegan if he becomes so splitter heavy?
No, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And basically, relievers for a long time have been 1-2 pitch guys, but unless you have like truly elite pitches, like Fernando Rodney's changeup or, Aroldis Chapman's fastball and slider or whatever, the hitters are really good. They can eliminate a pitch. And if they know one's coming that often, they can really sit on it, like you said. And the tough thing about splitters is if they don't tumble, they become batting practice fastballs. And that's kind of what happened. I think, Finnegan gave up, it's like 112 mile an hour double. And then, the other double wasn't hit nearly as hard, and you never want to get beat, not throwing your best pitch. And I don't have a big issue with the Tigers leaning into that philosophy of throwing your best pitch as much as you can. But I mixing in more fastballs would work. And also when they acquired Finnegan, he threw a slider a little bit, and he hasn't thrown the slider much at all. And again, it's not a great pitch for him, but if you can just fold one in every now and then, or throw it first pitch to steal a strike, it's something else the hitters have to think of. And, I'm sure they've gone through every permutation about what can happen and thought about this in depth. But if you see a guy 2 days in a row and he's only throwing 2 pitches and you can kind of eliminate one, and it makes hitting a lot easier.
All right, let's get into the big two. Question 1 of the big two. Are the Tigers officially back after overcoming the Cleveland Guardians in the AL wildcard? For me, the answer to that is yes and no. Emotionally, the Tigers are back. Logically, the Tigers are not back. The Tigers watched the Guardians come back from down 15.5 games to surpass the Tigers and win the AL Central, including winning 5 of the last 6 games in the regular season head-to-head matchup, with all 6 of those games in the final 12 games of the season. So, of course, for the Tigers, losing 5 of 6 and watching the Guardians steal the AL Central, that impacted them. No doubt about it. It challenged the Tigers both mentally and emotionally. And the Tigers ultimately rose to the occasion in the AL wildcard against the Guardians, winning 2 of 3 games, advancing to the ALDS. Like, they got over that hump. So there's that element of it. There's the other element is like, hey, this is a Guardians team that not only beat the Tigers down the stretch in 2025, but they knocked them out of the postseason in 2024. And that was in the ALDS. Remember that Lane Thomas grand slam off Tarek Skubal in game 5? Right. Everybody remembers it. It lingers. So it's like the Guardians were this like wall that the Tigers had to climb over, and the Tigers have finally gotten over that wall. So from that standpoint, I think the Tigers are back because they got past the Guardians. They don't have to worry about them anymore, at least not until 2026. That's exactly the boost that the Tigers needed to propel them into a deep October run. As for the logic of all this, though, the Tigers aren't back yet because they're not winning consistently. They're not scoring runs consistently. And even Tarek Skubal, the Tigers have lost 4 of the last 5 games he started, dating back to the regular season. So it's not an automatic win like a lot of people think. I feel like the assumption is, Tarek Skubal's in the mound. That's a win. The Tigers have lost 4 of their last 5 games started by Tarek Skubal. And that's not Tarek Skubal's fault. They're just not scoring enough runs. So is Tarek Skubal really a guaranteed win like we all think? I don't think so, because look at what history has told us over the last 5 starts for Tarek Skubal. Tigers have lost 4 of those. So it's not an automatic win. The offense is not rolling. This team is still not winning consistently. Like, there still are a lot of concerns. I think the Tigers really need to get back to scoring more runs before they're back in my book. But I do think beating the Guardians in the AL wildcard lifted a massive weight off their shoulders. But feeling better about yourself isn't what wins baseball games. Scoring runs is what wins baseball games. And that's what I think the Tigers need to get back to doing before I can confidently say, hey, like, this team is back. They are a team that can make a deep run in October. They are a team that should be treated like one of the best teams in baseball. And they were that way for a large portion of the season, but they're not back to that yet because of what I'm seeing on the field. even though the emotions of Cleveland and everything that comes with that, they've been able to put that to the side. And I think that's a huge step forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of just split it in half, right? It feels like the pitching is back. Tigers have, and part of that is, okay, you faced Cleveland for 3 games. They're terrible, but the Mariners had a very good offense, and the Tigers gave up 5 runs in 2 games. They have a 2.6 ERA through the playoffs so far. The whip is under 1. They're striking people out. They're not handing out free passes for the most part. They're pitching really well. It's reminiscent of what we saw last year. The offense has been on vacation since September, unfortunately. And I don't know what or how to fix that, honestly. And you could look at it. They've in the playoffs, they've got a strikeout rate close to 30% as a team. They're walking a fair amount. Maybe part of that, it's like 11% walk rate. Maybe part of the higher walks is working deeper counts and striking out more. They just are not hitting the ball. They're missing pitches in the zone. They're not chasing a ton other than the usual suspects, but they're not hitting pitches in the zone. And it's tough to figure, and it's hard to say they're back when they can't punish another team's mistakes. That's what caused them to lose yesterday. Tarik Skubal made a couple mistakes, and he's Tarik Skubal, so they're not really mistakes. He could throw it by people all the time. It just so happened he didn't. But the Tigers are getting pitches in the zone and not hitting them hard, and they need to figure out a way to fix that somehow. I'm at a loss for ideas. I hope that the team has some ideas. But yeah, so pitching back, offense, not back.
Question 2 of the big 2, because everybody likes to look too far ahead. So we're going to look too far ahead. Who is the better matchup for the Tigers in the ALCS if they get there? Toronto Blue Jays or New York Yankees? Right now, the Blue Jays have a 2-0 lead in the ALDS. I think the Yankees are the better matchup for the Tigers. So Tigers fans, in my book, we should be rooting for the Yankees to beat the Blue Jays. The main reason why I feel that way is Tigers have the second best offense in the big leagues against left-handed pitchers. So the Yankees 1-2 starters, Max Fried, Carlos Rodon, in that sense, aren't as scary to face. I think that's probably the number one factor in this debate for me is Tigers second best offense in the big leagues against lefties. Max Fried is a lefty. Carlos Rodon is a lefty. I think that could be advantage Tigers in what is a very difficult matchup against 2 elite left-handed pitchers. Tigers are good against lefties. I'll take that over like a Kevin Gausman, for example, with the Blue Jays, just because I think that the Tigers maybe have a better chance of getting to Max Fried or Carlos Rodon based on what their offense has done throughout the entire season. But both teams are a tough matchup. I mean, this Yankees bullpen, I mean, that is a tough matchup. They get a lot of strikeouts, and the Tigers strike out a lot, as we've discussed. That won't play well, especially not in Comerica Park. Maybe you run into a home run at Yankee Stadium, but not as likely at Comerica Park because of the dimensions. The Yankees offense, that's a tough test for Skubal because the Yankees, by the way, are the best team in baseball against lefties. Yes, the Tigers are the number 2 team. The Yankees are the number 1 team that's against left-handed pitchers. It's a 121 WRC plus for the Yankees and a 114 WRC plus for the Tigers. So maybe that gives the Yankees a little bit of an advantage against Tarik Skubal. Maybe it gives the Tigers a little bit of an advantage against Max Fried, Carlos Rodon. But it's Tarik Skubal. He's the best pitcher in the world, so maybe he could shut down the Yankees. I don't know how I feel about Jack Flaherty and or Casey Mize having success against either the Yankees offense or the Blue Jays offense. I mean, Aaron Judge is a lock for at least 1 home run in the first round of Flaherty/Mize starts in the ALCS, which tells you everything you need to know if you can bank on an Aaron Judge home run against one of those 2 guys the first time around. As for the Blue Jays offense, like they're maybe scarier than the Yankees right now. George Springer on another level. He's ridiculous. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., always a threat. Bo Bichette, probably going to be healthy again for the ALCS. So I also like the Blue Jays bullpen. Like that is a nasty bullpen. They're scary. If you don't get to their starters, it's an uphill battle. I don't know. Both teams are really dangerous. That's why they're in the ALDS. That's why they're 2 of the best teams in the American League. If I'm the Tigers, I think I'd rather face the Yankees because the Yankees give the Tigers the best chance to score runs. And if the Tigers want to win games, they need to score runs, especially early in games. So I like the matchups against left-handers, Max Fried, Carlos Rodon for the Tigers. That's why if I was the Tigers, I'd rather face the Yankees than the Blue Jays in the ALCS. But either way, man, that's going to be a tough battle no matter who advances. And right now, that Blue Jays team is just clicking on all cylinders.
Yeah, Toronto looks absolutely frightening right now.
They look ridiculous.
I mean, it's one thing, they won game 1. Yeah, and Clement has gotten to the Tigers a couple times. And I remember the last time the Tigers played the Blue Jays, and there was a couple epic Bo Bichette at bats against Tarik Skubal. Plate appearances because I think he eventually worked a walk. But yeah, I mean, that's a scary lineup. And you look, they've got 8 home runs in 2 playoff games. They've scored 23 runs in 2 playoff games. The Tigers have 14 runs in 5 playoff games. So that's, and then you mentioned Gausman, Trey Savage, the rookie, looked absolutely unhittable. he actually was unhittable, I believe, in game 2. And kind of most impressive to me is that they absolutely destroyed Max Fried. Like, it's one thing to get to Luis Hill or Luke Weaver, some of the lesser members of the Yankees bullpen, but Max Fried was one of the best pitchers of baseball this year. He was basically the Yankees version of Tarek Skubal, not as good, but Toronto had no issues with him. And so, yeah, that's very scary. So you kind of prefer the Yankees. It is kind of you pick your poison, the lesser of two evils here. And also, as you mentioned, probably looking a little too far ahead at this point, but by the next time we record, it'll be decided. So yeah, I think to me, the Yankees lineup feels a little bit more pitchable. Even, as amazing as Aaron Judge is, and he's truly one of the great right-handed hitters of all time. You look at the stats, they're there. He does strike out a fair amount, and you can kind of pitch around him a little bit. And, then it's Bellinger and Jazz Chisholm. They have some good players, but it's not, and just that Blue Jays lineup just feels like guys who have the worst possible combination for pitchers of contact and contacted damage. Alejandro Kirk, Guerrero, Bichette, Clement, you mentioned George Springer with this crazy bounce back year. So yeah, I think I'd rather face the Yankees, but it wouldn't be an easy task no matter what.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we are joined by Seattle Mariners beat writer Ryan Divish, who works for the Seattle Times. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Ryan Divish, the Seattle Mariners beat writer for the Seattle Times, to the Days of Our podcast. Not only has Ryan spent most of the past 20 years as a beat writer covering the Mariners, but he's also a baseball coach. More on that later. Ryan, thank you for joining me as the Tigers and Mariners clash in the ALDS.
Happy to do it.
Let's start with these first two games. The Tigers won 3-2 in game 1. Then the Mariners won 3-2 in game 2. What has stood out to you about games 1 and 2 of the ALDS, whether it's the Mariners, the Tigers, or a little bit of both teams?
Just how close they've been, honestly. They've been a grind. You look at some of the other series where there's a bunch of runs being scored, but these guys aren't scoring a ton of runs. We've seen really good pitching. I don't know if we've seen great hitting in terms of approaches or anything like that, but we have seen a lot of really good pitching. Look at tonight, Skubal was outstanding. He made essentially 2 bad pitches and, he got punished for both of them. But I think that's been the big thing, is just how close these games are and just how good of pitching we've seen.
There's a lot to discuss about games 1 and 2, but I'm curious about how the Mariners got here. Finished 90-72 during the regular season, won the AL West. What was their journey to the postseason like?
It wasn't the straightest path. I mean, how the Tigers kind of struggled that last 2 weeks of the season. The Mariners had that in the middle parts of the season. They had issues on the road. I mean, they had a road trip where they went, I think, 2-7 or 2-8. And then they had another one where they lost 6 or 7 before coming back and winning the final 2. So, I mean, they weren't good on the road, and that they started to kind of crater. And, they had a game in Atlanta where they just kind of said, screw it. But it was a different word that they used that started playing better. And Julio Rodriguez actually was the catalyst in that game. He hit a pair of homers and made a ridiculous catch, and they won that game. Then they won, I think, 10 in a row after that. And so they didn't have quite their swoon or their swoon back to, or the regression. Theirs came at 2 different times on the road, a little bit more in the middle of September, and they were able to withstand it and kind of close it out. Like the Tigers, theirs is kind of a little bit longer, and they had that really rough stretch right before the end of the season. And it's like the timing of the season, so much about it. It's not when you play a team, or not who you play, but when you play them a lot of times. And I think the Mariners, they had their stretches where they weren't great, but they figured out a way to be pretty good here towards the end.
The 2025 Mariners wouldn't be the 2025 Mariners without Cal Raleigh, a switch hitter who started 119 of his 159 games at catcher. He hit 60 home runs. He racked up 125 RBIs. He hit 247 with a 948 OPS. First catcher to hit 60 home runs in MLB history. Most home runs in franchise history for the Mariners, passing Ken Griffey Jr. What was it like to watch Cal Raleigh and cover Cal Raleigh on a daily basis during this historic season?
It's pretty ridiculous. I don't invoke my playing career very much, but I was a catcher in college. Unwillingly, I was converted to catcher, but it was a grind every day just to play at NAI level. I was beaten up all the time. I felt tired. And this is a guy that's catching major league pitchers every single day almost. And he goes out there and produces numbers that are just unheard of. And when you're breaking records in a season, you're breaking the name records held by Johnny Bench, Ken Griffey Jr., and Mickey Mantle. I mean, that's the elite of the elite. And all of that, like the offensive numbers are outstanding. But to me, I'm an old school kind of person when it comes to catching and how he handles the pitching staff. He didn't have a pass ball the entire season. He didn't have one pass ball. I just think like what he does defensively, how he handles the pitching staff, and that's always his priority first, is so special. And then you throw the offense in because this is a guy that hits 35 home runs anyways. He just added 25 more in a season. So we'll never see a season like this from a catcher again. I think he knows he can't replicate it. It's a special season, and I think it's pretty worthy of winning the MVP.
What led to Cal Raleigh's breakthrough this season? Because he's always been a good player, a great player, offensively, defensively, but he took it to a whole nother level in 2025. How did he do this?
I think it's just mostly work, and he made some adjustments to his swing, both right-handed and left-handed. It's weird. He does this drill where he hits the ball straight up. He puts the tee as high as he can. He tries to hit the ball straight up in the air to the top of the net. It's a drill that Edgar Martinez wanted him to do. To kind of like, he liked to drift into pitches, and they wanted him to stop drifting into pitches. So he started doing that. Julio Rodriguez saw what it was doing and liked that drill as well. But yeah, I think that's been a big part. Cal is one of those guys that self-assesses pretty well. So like a few years ago, he finished second in framing metrics to Austin Hedges, and he was a great framer and he finished second. So he went to Hedges and asked for help with his framing, and Hedges was eagerly helped him. So they did a couple sessions. He changed up his entire framing style, mimicking what Hedges did. And then he beat Hedges in framing the next year. So that's kind of what he does. So I think he self-assessed a little bit, and he decided like, hey, look, I need to be better, at the plate in terms of striking out a little less, getting my right-handed swing better, all these things. And so he put in the work for it. He spent the offseason working on those aspects because he didn't like being platooned. A lot of times in years past, he wouldn't hit right-handed very often. And he didn't want that to be the case. He wanted to play more. He wanted to DH when he wasn't catching. So he worked on his right-handed swing to make it more commensurate with his left. And he's actually, I think, been a little bit better with his right-handed swing in terms of power this year.
There's a lot of debate. Aaron Judge, Cal Raleigh, AL MVP. Can you make the case for Cal Raleigh? And then also, who do you think will win AL MVP?
Well, I just think I was going to count one time how many times he got into a crouch during a game. I just didn't have the patience to see him do it. But he plays the toughest position in baseball, the most important position in baseball. He's a platinum level fielder, platinum glove winning level fielder. He has got the trust of the pitching staff, and then he goes out and puts up numbers that nobody's ever done at that position. I look at it, Aaron Judge, Cal is going to play 75 more innings in the field than Aaron Judge did. And it's not right field, it's catcher. So I just think that the value that he brings from a daily basis, from a defensive standpoint, and anchoring a pitching staff as well, and being kind of the guy that trusts him. Like tonight, we watched Luis Castillo pitch. Luis Castillo does not shake off Cal Raleigh. Cal Raleigh calls every single pitch that Luis Castillo throws. He does not shake him off. He trusts him. He understands that Cal knows better than he does about what he should be doing. So he just does it. You don't see guys shake Cal off very often. I don't think he lets them, but he puts in the work. And, if you're going to have that idea, if you're going to have that mentality where guys aren't allowed to shake me off, then they better know that you put in the work to prepare for each outing and that you know what works best. And he does that. He puts the pitchers ahead of himself every day. And I think that's a big deal.
The Mariners have another superstar in Julio Rodriguez, their center fielder in his fourth MLB season. Let's be honest, Julio Rodriguez, to his standards, had a down year in 2024, but he has bounced back with what should be a top 10 finish in MVP voting in 2025. What are your takeaways on Julio Rodriguez in 2025? And I can't help but notice he had a 944 OPS in August and an 899 OPS in September. So he stepped up when the Mariners needed him most.
I look at him as since the All-Star break, this is kind of who they thought he could be. For as good as he was as a rookie and even parts of the 23 season and 24 season, since the All-Star break and really the couple weeks before that, starting with the series versus the Tigers, he's really kind of shown the player he should be, I think, to match his unbelievable talent. He plays a Gold Glove level center fielder. And if he's not a Gold Glove winner, I think it would be kind of a crime because he's really been one of the best center fielders in the American League. But the hitting has been better. He has struck out less. He has walked more. He is, still hitting for power, but he's also getting his hits and hitting with runners in scoring position a lot better. He's changed up his mentality at the plate. And I think it's just, what we're seeing here is a more sustainable approach for him moving forward. I think in the last few years, he's gotten caught up in, some of the launch angle stuff and everything like that and gotten away from who he wanted to be. And I think with working with Edgar Martinez and Kevin Seitzer and some of these guys, he's kind of figured out an approach that works for him, that allows him to have his best success. He's not getting full happy. He's not trying to focus on power, but he still has power. Like he talked about today, like taking his shots when they're available versus, just staying to the middle of the field and trying to hit the ball as hard as he can.
Lots of other big name players on offense. Randy Arozarena, JP Crawford, Jorge Polanco, Josh Naylor, and then the Mariners go out and get Eugenio Suarez at the trade deadline. Of those players, who has impressed you the most? And who is the biggest reason for the team's success?
I think Polanco has been absolutely critical for them. Tonight he hits 2 homers off of school, but like he's been so solid all year. And he was the guy they picked up at the very end of the offseason on a 1-year deal with a vesting option and coming off of knee surgery. So like what he's done hitting behind Cal and Julio and really being a stabilizing presence in the middle of the lineup, it's kind of who they thought they were getting when they traded for him prior to the 24 season, but he was hurt. He couldn't swing it the way he wanted to. So I think he's been the biggest factor. Behind that, I look at probably Josh Naylor coming in and bringing a level of intensity to them. And then, Randy's having a great year. Don't get me wrong. Like he's had a great year, probably one of his best of his career, but you kind of expect him to still be pretty good. And then JP Crawford's been a lot better. Like he was awful last year. He was hurt. He just couldn't get any traction because every time he would get healthy, he would get hurt again. I think this year he's been healthy. He has only missed a couple of games and he's been much better, a more consistent offensive producer, and he gives them one of their better at-bats most nights.
For many years, the Mariners have been known for dominant pitching staffs. This year, it's Brian Wu, Luis Castillo, Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Bryce Miller in the rotation. The Tigers won't be seeing Brian Wu in the ALDS because he remains sidelined with a pectoral injury. He has been the ace of the Mariners rotation this year. How close was he to being active for this series? And how much does his absence change the way this series unfolds?
Yeah, I think they knew deep down that Wu wasn't going to be ready, but they kind of held out hope. It's a big piece missing. He's been their best guy. I think what helps them, and really Kirby and Gilbert and Bryce Miller have all spent time on the injured list. I think part of it was because they worked career highs in innings last year and we're seeing the residual effects of it. But I guess maybe because they haven't pitched as much this year, they're going to be stronger down the stretch, but they just haven't been. Gilbert hasn't been as efficient. Kirby hasn't had the command that he wants. Miller has been kind of up and down, but when they're right, they're pretty elite. You're talking about last year, they were the best rotation in Major League Baseball. So they're very capable of going out and being dominant. And the Mariners are hoping that that's what they're going to see. I think they're hoping that they can get through this series and maybe Wu is ready to return. But not having a guy that's pretty much 6 innings every time he steps on the mound is pretty difficult to navigate and not have in your rotation.
As for the Mariners starters not named Brian Wu, Luis Castillo, Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Bryce Miller. We already saw George Kirby in Game 1, Luis Castillo in Game 2. It feels like any one of them could have an ace caliber performance at any given time. What stands out to you about the non-Brian Wu starters, and who do you trust the most?
I think I would trust, I'd probably go with Gilbert and then Kirby. Gilbert has the best stuff. He has the best strikeout stuff, the best swing and miss stuff. Kirby has looked pretty sharp. Even in Game 1, he looked pretty sharp. He just hasn't been as efficient. And then Miller he just hasn't thrown enough this year. But I would trust Gilbert the most. That's why I think part of it is they think his stuff plays fine on the road, and when he's right on the road, he's had some splits issues as well. But I think that they think he can win on the road and win at Comerica, and that's why they waited till Game 3.
As for the ALDS, the atmosphere at T-Mobile Park in Games 1 and 2 against the Tigers, it was electric. I've never experienced anything like that before in my life. Did that surprise you at all?
No, I knew this was going to be a madhouse every night. this is a baseball town, even with the Seahawks success. When the baseball team's good, they show up and they're loud, and you can just feel kind of the hopeful anxiety that they have. They want to win so badly, and they're so used to losing. So it's like they show up and they're loud. I mean, it was as loud as I've ever heard it tonight. And I mean, it's a pretty big deal.
In game one, the Tigers won 3-2 in the 11th inning, but the moment of the game for me occurred in the 5th inning when Mariners manager Dan Wilson let George Kirby face Kerry Carpenter for a 3rd time with a runner on second base and 2 outs, even though he could have gone to left-handed reliever Gabe Spire. Do you think sticking with George Kirby to face Kerry Carpenter for a 3rd time with the runner on second base in a close ball game was the right move by Dan Wilson, or was it a mistake by Dan Wilson?
Yeah, I don't think that was the right play at all. I think that you don't let Kerry Carpenter beat you. It doesn't. I mean, like he's like Babe Ruth against the Mariners, so you don't let him beat you. You certainly don't let him beat you with a guy that when George Kirby's already given up 4 homers off of him, you don't let him beat you. So I thought that was the bigger issue. You saw in game 2, they bring him Gabe Spire to pitch to Carpenter. I mean, like if he's coming up and there's runners on base, you do not use a right-hander to pitch to him if you have Gabe Spire available and ready to go.
That leads me into my next question. Kerry Carpenter obviously hits a 2-run home run, puts the Tigers ahead 2-1 in the 5th inning of game 1. Kerry Carpenter has 5 hits in his career against George Kirby. All of them are home runs. We talked about the Dan Wilson decision. How do you evaluate Dan Wilson in his first full season as the Mariners manager?
Like, I don't know that Dan's tactical managing is certainly not comparable to AJ Hinch. Like we're talking about AJ Hinch he knows how to win a game in the playoffs, and Dan's frankly never done that. I mean, there have been decisions in the regular season that have been questionable, but I think the one thing is Dan learns from it. He did it, he didn't let Carpenter beat him the next night. So I think that, I think he self-assesses pretty well. I think the biggest thing is that Dan sometimes he trusts his players a little too much, and he wants to build that trust with them for them to know he trusts them. I think that gets them in trouble at times.
In game 2, the Mariners won 3-2. It was Jorge Polanco with 2 solo home runs off Tarek Skubal. Then Cal Raleigh and Julio Rodriguez had back-to-back doubles off Kyle Finnegan in the bottom of the 8th inning to take the lead. Is that an example of just how special those guys are, especially considering those are the superstars?
Yeah, I think honestly, anytime you're in the postseason, you need your stars to deliver. What do we talk about sometimes at Judge in the past years when he didn't deliver, although he is this year? Look at what Vlad Guerrero is doing for the Blue Jays. You need your star players to deliver. They need to come through. Even if they're getting the toughest pitches to hit, they're the best players, so they need to do it. And I mean, I think that's one thing we're seeing from Cal and Julio is that they're producing. They've had the hits. They've come up in big moments. And, for the Mariners to move on, that's who's going to carry them. They got contributions from other guys, and this is their best lineup they've had in years, but it still matters about the stars.
Before we get out of here, I want to ask you about your career as a baseball coach. You took a 4-month sabbatical from the Seattle Times this summer to coach baseball in Montana. What team were you coaching? What did you learn? And what was it like stepping away from the baseball beat to be a baseball coach?
Yeah, I coached the team called the Havre North Stars. It's an American Legion team back in Montana. It's my hometown. It's the team I played for. I grew up a block from the field, and I played on that team for 3 years. And I coached that team when I was playing in college, coming back every summer and coaching. And so I call him my stepson, but my girlfriend's son, they live back in Havre, and he was playing this year. And the coach, who was a friend of mine, stepped down, and they didn't have a coach. They had a couple parents that were going to do it. And I just said, no, I'm going to do this. I wanted to coach my stepson. I wanted to have that opportunity, and I needed a break from the grinds of travel, and I don't regret it. I've said it before. It's the best summer of my life. I had so much fun. It didn't end the way we wanted to. We had some controversy and stuff like that, but I had so much fun doing it. If the Times let me, I do it again. I don't think they're going to, but it's just like taking a step back and kind of getting the simpler roots of baseball was important. And also it just allowed me to, come back here refreshed and ready to go in the middle of this playoff run. So no, I had so much fun, and I would do it again if I could.
All right, Ryan, thank you for joining me to break down the Mariners as these teams are 2 games into the best of 5 ALDS. The series continues Tuesday with Game 3 at Comerica Park in Detroit. Thank you for joining the Days of Roar podcast.
No problem, man. Take it easy.
Everyone, that was Ryan Divish, the Seattle Mariners beat writer for the Seattle Times. We have more to discuss this week about the Tigers with co-host Chris Brown. But first, let's take a break. We're back. Thanks again to Ryan Divish, the Seattle Mariners beat writer for the Seattle Times, for joining the Days of Roar podcast. Chris Brown of Tigers Minor League Report. I have a big question for you. Are the Tigers ever going to start hitting with runners in scoring position?
It sure doesn't feel like it. I would love to say, hey, the law of averages here, it's going to even out. You know, it felt like that way a little bit in Game 3 of the Wild Card Series after they went 1 for 15 with runners in scoring position. And by the way, the one hit still led to an out in that game. That was when McKinstry got thrown out at third. And then they got a handful of hits the next day. It just, again, like in my mind, if you're getting on base, you're doing the hardest part of the job. I guess, you know, you've reached base. That's good. That they can't seem to do it in any sort of timely manner other than Kerry Carpenter with a 2-run homer the other day. And I guess, you know, McKinstry with a hit. It's hard to fathom. It's hard to figure out why it's happening. I can't honestly say, yeah, they're going to turn it around and figure it out because this is going on close to a month now where they just haven't been able to get those big hits when they need them. And then it felt like for a while there, even when they did, that's when the pitching would collapse. We haven't seen that as much here in the last week or two, but yeah, I don't know. Cross your fingers. Hope for just think of the Polanco, Polanco hit 2 home runs yesterday. Think of that hit he got in his final at bat, which was a broken bat infield, 40 mile an hour blooper that was right between McKinstry and Baez. That's all you need. Something like that you get lucky, put the ball in play. That's the biggest issue, I think. And I mentioned it before is that the Tigers have about a 30% strikeout rate in the postseason as a team. You're less likely to get those lucky hits when you can't put the ball in play. And so I think that's something they really need to focus on, but I'm not sure if they have the personnel to do it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Being the team that strikes out so often makes it difficult. Like I think the strikeouts are really the problem here. The Tigers just aren't putting the ball in play enough. You go back to September 11th. That's when the Tigers began their downfall, their collapse. Here are some of your whiff rate leaders, regular season and postseason since September 11th. Spencer Torkelson at 42.5%. Dylan Dingler at 35.9%. Riley Green at 35.7%. Wenceel Perez at 31.6%. After Perez, you have Andy Ibanez, Zach McKinstry, Gleyber Torres, Kerry Carpenter, Javier Baez, Parker Meadows, Jahmai Jones, all in that 27 to 30% whiff rate range since September 11th. That's a problem. The whiff rates are an issue. I mean, Spencer Torkelson, nearly 43%. Dylan Dingler at 36%. Riley Green at 36%. Wenceel Perez at 32%. Like, that's just not going to get it done. The Tigers are swinging and missing too often, especially in high leverage spots. And it's sad because you've seen it time and time again where they do put up quality plate appearances. They really do. They work deep into counts. They draw walks. They get guys on base, and then they just can't get the job done when they need the big hit. And so I think there needs to just be an emphasis on putting the ball in play, just like they did in Game 3 of the AL wildcard when Perez, Torkelson, Green had 3 singles in a row that resulted in 4 runs. I think it starts with Spencer Torkelson and Riley Green. I think they need to be the leaders of that change because Torque with the 43% whiff rate since September 11th, Riley Green with a 36% whiff rate since September 11th. That's just not good enough. And then I do wonder too, like maybe the Tigers will eventually start to figure it out if they just continue to give themselves enough opportunities. And they've given themselves a lot of chances. Like you look at the playoffs. Tigers have the most plate appearances with runners in scoring position among the 12 teams in the postseason. Part of that is the fact that the Tigers have played as many games as they played in the postseason. But the other element of it is Tigers have just gotten a lot of guys into scoring position and haven't been able to come through. It's been 57 plate appearances for the Tigers, 46 for the Yankees, 34 for the Dodgers. Those 3 teams have given themselves the most opportunities with runners in scoring position. But among the 12 teams in the postseason, the Tigers ranked 9th with a 192 batting average with runners in scoring position. Whereas the teams I just mentioned, the Dodgers, they're hitting 313 with runners in scoring position. The Yankees are hitting 282 with runners in scoring position. The Tigers are 10 for 52 with runners in scoring position in the postseason. So they're giving themselves opportunities. They're just not coming through. And I do wonder, maybe if you just keep giving yourself enough opportunities, eventually it's going to happen. But you look at the calendar. I mean, we're going on game 3 of the ALDS. It's October 6th going into October 7th. You're starting to run out of time to figure it out, right? You think that maybe it'll self-correct. Like, we're running out of days in the calendar before it's do or die time in the ALDS. So I don't know if the Tigers can just bank on, hey, it's going to come back around. It's going to self-correct. It almost feels like something needs to happen now, but then you run into the issue of if you try to make something happen now, you start to press and it gets even worse. Is there even a path out of this for the Tigers, or do you just kind of have to keep hacking away and hope you run into one?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the teams who hit more home runs in the postseason win. So if that could be your path out of it, is just hitting some home runs. Not necessarily with men on base. You hit a couple dingers and you're good. I will say, like, to your point, I mean, they hit 258 with runners in scoring position over the course of the entire season. And what was it in the playoffs? 190? Is that what you said? 150? Something? 10 for 52?
192, 10 for 52.
So, yeah, I mean, the law of averages you would think, but they're facing better pitching now. And here's the fun part. Logan Gilbert will probably be the best pitcher they've seen so far in the postseason. Now, they got to him sort of very early in the season. I think they scored 3 runs, but struck out 10 times. But they got him out of there in like 5 innings. And that's, as you said, they're not having terrible plate appearances, and they did a good job in the first 2 games of working up the starting pitcher's pitch count and getting him out of the games. And that's, generally speaking, that's a good thing. So that may be what they have to do with Gilbert. They may have to try to get him out with 5 innings and, 100 pitches and maybe a dozen strikeouts or something crazy like that. But yeah, I got to put the bat on the ball somehow. Maybe that is more McKinstry guards ball, but generally speaking, I think you may be better off just trying to work those deep counts and rather than, sneak a bunt single early. But I don't know. You feel like the dam will break at some point, but you have to see it before you really believe it.
At this point, boys, just swing for the fences all the time and just see what happens. That's where I'm at. I mean, seriously, if they're not coming through, maybe they're trying to do too much. I don't know. Maybe it's time to just hack away, try to run into a couple of home runs, and maybe you end up putting up a 3 or a 4 spot and the pitching keeps you in the game. But that has been what's worked for the Tigers is when you take a look at what they've done, they've been built on pitching and defense. President of Baseball Operations, Scott Harris, has talked about that for quite some time, that this team needs to be a team that succeeds pitching and defense. And right now, the pitching staff, it is as locked in as it's been since when? I mean, it feels like it's been a really long time since this pitching staff, both the rotation and the bullpen, have been as successful as they are right now. How impressed are you? And do you see this continuing as the Tigers continue to move along? Because we are seeing the good version of Tommy Kahnle, Brant Herter, Tyler Holton. I mean, especially having Herter and Holton as the only left-handed relievers in the bullpen. When those 2 guys are at their best, this Tigers team is a different Tigers team. And then you're getting the good versions of Casey Mize and Jack Flaherty in the rotation. Do you see this continuing? And how much of a revelation has it been getting this type of a pitching staff back in action after such a long stretch where the rotation was faltering, the bullpen was faltering, and back and forth and back and forth? Now it seems like everyone's pretty synced up.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. It's you could argue they're pitching the best they have since last year down the stretch. I would say it's probably, they had some good stretches earlier this year in May and July where they pitched really well. But the key to me, and so far, fingers crossed here, is that Holton and Herter, aside from the random, blow up, and Cleveland, have both pitched really well down the stretch, including the playoffs. They're locating their pitches. They're not giving up home runs again, except for the one that Herter gave up. And that's huge, I think, too. I mean, Holton got the Tigers out of the biggest jam they had the other day when Montero came in and put 3 men on. And that was huge. That was what Holton did forever the last 2 years, was he was a guy that put out fires. And to have that back is big. And, Flaherty has pitched better. Mize has pitched pretty well. And Skubal. So they're giving them chances to win. They're giving themselves chances to win with the pitching. And again, it just comes down to the hitting, but you feel pretty good now with everybody who heads out there to the mound. I don't necessarily dread seeing somebody. I mean, obviously there are some guys you want to see more than others, but Will Vest has been really good too. So the pitching is falling into order, and that's good. Tigers fans should feel good about that. But, you got to hope that holds up while the offense finds its way.
Looking ahead to this series, shifting to Comerica Park, Jack Flaherty is starting game 3, Casey Mize starting game 4 in the ALDS. Do you think that's the right order for those 2 pitchers? Obviously, the Tigers started Casey Mize in game 2 and Jack Flaherty in game 3 in the AL wildcard. Now they're flipping those guys in the rotation, and it's going to be Jack Flaherty in game 3, Casey Mize in game 4 in the ALDS. there really is no strategy here other than this screams to me that the Tigers think that Jack Flaherty gives them a better chance to win than Casey Mize, because when the Tigers set Jack Flaherty as their Game 3 starter, you were in a position where either you were going to go up 2-0 in the series and Game 3 was going to be to win the series, or you were going to lose Game 2 and it was going to be 1-1 and Game 3 was going to be a pivotal Game 3. Whoever wins Game 3 is going to grab a hold of the series and be in the driver's seat. So regardless of which way it went, the Tigers were counting on Jack Flaherty and seemingly like Jack Flaherty more than they like Casey Mize in terms of who gives you the best chance to win. Maybe part of it is the spin. I think I like that. I mean, Jack Flaherty with the slider, with the curveball against some of these Mariners hitters. When you look at Randy Arozarena, when you look at Julio Rodriguez, when you look at Cal Raleigh, and those guys are legit hitters and those guys do some damage, but they also have a lot of swing and miss in their game too. So I think maybe some of the spin from Jack Flaherty could give him an advantage. Casey Mize generally does not miss as many bats. Now, Casey Mize's stuff has been good and it's led to strikeouts. It's led to some called third strikeouts. It's led to some, strikeouts with the fastball up, the splitter down. But Jack Flaherty, when he has the slider working, when he has the curveball working, he can really miss some bats more so than Casey Mize. So maybe that's the reason why the Tigers feel a little bit more confident in Jack Flaherty in Game 3. But to me, this said, the Tigers feel more confident in Jack Flaherty to win Game 3 than they would in Casey Mize to win Game 3. And you think that is the right assessment from what we've seen? Jack Flaherty has been so inconsistent this season. Granted, he may be finding it a little bit more, right? Casey Mize, however, though, that guy is such a bulldog. And when he goes into outings, I mean, he never gives in. Even if he does get hit around, he finds a way to get out of it. Jack Flaherty may be more prone to having a blow-up inning. I don't know. What are your thoughts on how the Tigers went about this decision? Was it the right choice to make? Would you like to see Casey Mize in Game 3? Or do you think Jack Flaherty is the right guy to go in Game 3?
I mean, it's tough. I think, just last week I was like, Mize is pitching better than Flaherty. And, he didn't look stellar in his outing against Cleveland. He wasn't awful, but Flaherty looked pretty good. He also wasn't stellar, but he wasn't awful. So it is kind of like a pick your poison there, whoever you want. I do think, I was just kind of looking up to see how the Mariners handle breaking balls versus splitters or whatever. And they actually do a much better job hitting breaking balls. Now, Flaherty has some of the better breaking balls in baseball. The other issue is that if you look by run values, Casey Mize's splitter is the worst splitter in baseball. And so it's almost like with him, it's the threat of the splitter, and then he could kind of sneak fastballs and breaking balls by you. And I just think, ultimately, and this is why we kind of, for most of the year, considered Flaherty their number 2 starter, or probably going to be number 2 heading into the rotation or the playoffs, is he's just probably the more talented overall pitcher, and you want to give yourself a chance to win. Not that, as you talk about, Casey Mize is a bulldog. He battles out there. He gets out of jams better than a lot of people. But, I think Flaherty gives them a little bit better chance to shut down that offense.
When it does come down to just the talent level of those two pitchers, you are going to take the more talented pitcher, the guy who has more upside, let's just say. And I think Jack Flaherty has more of an upside than Casey Mize. If you're talking about who could give you 6-7 scoreless innings with a bunch of punch outs and keep guys off the bases, who gives you a better chance to do that? It's probably Jack Flaherty. When Jack Flaherty has his best stuff, I think Jack Flaherty is better than Casey Mize. So that makes sense. However, Jack Flaherty's just been really inconsistent. He's had a hard time finding his best stuff, that's the concern. That's the danger when you go with Jack Flaherty over Casey Mize is what if Jack Flaherty doesn't have his best stuff?
Yeah. And part of me wonders if, Flaherty tends to throw more balls than Mize does. And I just wonder if, and I haven't looked into it, maybe I should have, but if Seattle is a little bit more prone to chasing.
For sure. And I think that's the element of the spin, the swing and miss, throwing balls out of the zone, getting those guys to chase 100% spot on. They do. They are a team that they do chase more often. They're more of a free swinging team. They're a very emotional team as well, right? I mean, they are a team that, they will swing for the fences at times. And so I do think, you're spot on. The combination of the swing and miss from Jack Flaherty plus the chase from the Mariners hitters probably advantage Flaherty.
But we'll see. They're both going to get a chance to go out there and pitch, and maybe Mize shoves. So we'll see.
We'll see. All right. Colt Keith returning from the injured list for the ALDS. How much of a difference maker is he in this series, especially with the Mariners only having 2 left-handed relievers in their bullpen? I mean, you've got Colt Keith, Kerry Carpenter, Riley Green in your lineup. Those are 3 lefty hitters. Well, the Mariners only have 2 lefty relievers to attack those guys. So it's kind of pick your poison in terms of where do you want to bring him into the game. I think it gives AJ Hinch more of an opportunity to stack the 2 lefties with Kerry and Riley, and then to be able to have Torque and then have Colt Keith. It just gives him more of an advantage as he builds out the lineup, where it makes it more difficult for the Mariners to attack these guys. And then if they do, the Tigers can flip in Jahmai Jones and they can flip in Wenzel Perez and Andy Ibanez, and they can give themselves the pinch hit advantage as well to get the platoon advantage. So it's not like Colt Keith, the bat, is the only thing that's making the difference. Just his presence in the lineup does a lot as well, because he is one of those guys that opposing teams do have to manage against. Yes, they really key in on Kerry Carpenter. Yes, Riley Green is a threat, and he's somebody that, opposing managers and pitching coaches, they are going to circle on their board Kerry Carpenter and Riley Green. But I tell you, they will not forget about Colt Keith, because that is a guy who time and time again will put the ball in play and move it forward. He's done a better job of drawing walks this year, and you never know when he's going to surprise you with a powerful swing. He can pack a punch sometimes as well. How big is it for the Tigers getting Colt Keith back? Even if he's not going to play third base right away and he's just going to be in the DH spot because he's still managing some of that pain from the right rib cage inflammation, the intercostal strain. How big of an advantage is Colt Keith coming back? And what are you looking forward to as this series continues?
I think it's pretty big. We were talking about it a week or two ago about, how big would it be to get him back? And we've already seen he's been on base twice in 2 games. But to your point, and I think you kind of laid this out well, is that he's almost kind of like a pawn in Hinch's chess game. He's using Keith. I thought they might bring Keith off the bench, but he's using Keith in the starting lineup. And then whenever there's a chance to get an advantage against a lefty pitcher, maybe Ferguson or Spire, Keith comes out, and he's kind of using Keith as the guy that gets sacrificed so Carpenter doesn't have to a little bit. And yeah, so I think that's helpful, and it really does play into Hinch's hands as a way to manipulate the other manager. Now you just need some other guys to come through, but Keith has all year long, if we're talking about getting hits with runners in scoring position, Keith was one of the better performers on the Tigers all year. It was Keith and Gleyber Torres, I think, were the top 2 hitters with runners in scoring position. And that could be big too. He just hasn't really had a chance to do that yet, but he's a guy that you can usually trust to put the ball in play. And I think that could be a big factor in the coming games if he comes off the bench, or if, they get a big chance early in a game. So yeah, it's big to have him back. He's one of your better bats.
Injury updates: Matt Vierling, Reese Olson. Outfielder Matt Vierling, he's down with a left oblique strain. He's been out for a while. He joined the Tigers in Seattle for the ALDS. He took live batting practice alongside Colt Keith against Chris Paddock and Paul Sewald. The Tigers decided to activate Colt Keith. However, they did not activate Matt Vierling, but he stayed with the team to continue his rehab. It seems like they're targeting an ALCS return for Matt Vierling. I don't know where I'm at with him though. With the way that the season has gone, with the injuries, and then you go look at the performance, does Matt Vierling help the Tigers in the ALCS? I don't know if he does or if he doesn't. Is he an upgrade over Andy Ibanez? Is he an upgrade over Trey Sweeney? I don't know if the Tigers would want to have 3 of those types of players, right? I mean, if you were to have again, it's the Jahan thing too. If you were to have Jahmai Jones, Andy Ibanez, Justin Henry Malloy, Matt Vierling, all of those guys are right-handed hitters who historically hit better against lefties. And maybe that's how AJ Hinch would want to use those guys. Well, you don't need 4 of those guys on your roster. So if you're not going to have Jahan on your roster, but you're going to have Jahmai, would you take Matt Vierling over Andy Ibanez? Or would you just do a straight swap and say, hey, you know what, Trey Sweeney, we're good. We're going to go with Matt Vierling. We're sticking with Javi at shortstop, and we're going to have Zach McKinstry as the backup shortstop. That is another way that you could get Matt Vierling on the roster. But at that point, is it worth it? Is Matt Vierling for Trey Sweeney worth it? Is Matt Vierling for Andy Ibanez worth it? And if the answer is yes, then let's fire him up and get him going for the ALCS. If not, maybe we don't see Matt Vierling.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's been such a stop and start season for him. It's hard to believe that he would be in game shape. I mean, sure, he's working out and everything like that, but being able to come in and face live pitching again, it almost feels like he's an option just in case the Yankees make it, in which case you could add him to face Fried and Rodon. But the Blue Jays don't really have a lefty starter. They have, I think they had Eric Lauer start some games this year, but he's not going to start in the playoffs. So it's another possible option, but I've kind of given up on Matt Vierling playing this year, to be honest with you. I don't know who he's a real upgrade over at this point. It's just hard to predict anything from him when he hasn't played much.
And watching him take live BPs in Seattle, those swings, they didn't look great. I mean, they didn't look great. He looked like he was flailing as he was taking cuts. So that wasn't a good sign. Maybe it was just a bad live BP session, but it didn't look great. And then Reese Olson, right shoulder strain. He will not be ready for the ALCS, I don't think. That's kind of how things are trending. That's what I'm hearing right now. It seems like a World Series return is more likely for Reese Olson at this point, and it probably wouldn't even be as a starter it would be more as a guy coming out of the bullpen, giving you some innings in that way, or maybe even as an opener of some type in the World Series. But it seems like ALCS might be just a tad bit too soon for Reese Olson. World Series may be more likely. And if not, if it doesn't end up working out, then the Tigers are just going to get him into the offseason and get him ready for 2026 spring training. All right, let's get out of here. Thanks to Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for co-hosting with me this week. And thanks to everyone out there for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Drop us a rating, comment what you think about the show. Stick with free.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, sports editor Bill Bradley, and our magical producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.